Okay, welcome everyone to our webinar today. We'll give it one more minute while we wait for everyone to join us, and then we'll get started. All right, well, let's kick things off. Welcome everyone to our webinar on the fundamental shift in security, new ways of thinking, operating, and informing. Right before we begin, just some brief housekeeping rules and some housekeeping points rather, not rules. We will be recording this webinar, so we'll be able to make it available to you if you need to go back and revisit something, and we'll send that to all the attendees and people who signed up. If you have a question, there is a special question box within the webinar platform. Just put your question in there. And if you're directing it to one of the presenters today, make sure you include their name as well. And if you have any other comments or you want to get in touch with us, I've included on the screen our contact information for Riskline and Human Risks, and each of the presenters will also be including their contact information for you as well. Just some brief introductions. My name is Siobhan Anderberg, and I am the Marketing Director at Human Risks. We've also got Suzanne on the call as well. She'll be able to answer questions. She's the Commercial and Partnerships Director at Riskline. To introduce our presenters, we've got three speakers today. We've got Emanuele from Riskline. He's the Director of Partnerships and Strategic Relations. We've got Mess here. He's the CEO of Human Risks. And we've got a special guest joining us today, Mikael. He is the Director of Security for Sky News Arabia. And I've put their bios up on the screens and you'll be able to read those as well. But I think after a year like 2020, we might need a bit of fun in our lives, especially coming up into the holiday season. So I'm going to ask each of you, what has been a new hobby that you've started or a new thing that you've learned since the beginning of the COVID shutdowns? Emanuele, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, thanks, Siobhan. Welcome, everyone. I think in my case, I actually stopped doing any hobbies because I was so busy, I didn't really have time to do. But just to satisfy the audience with an answer, I think I started getting more involved in gardening, just for a change.
Nice. Any plants in particular that you're particularly proud of?
Well, those that didn't die in the process because they didn't make it, I guess. But no, I guess, you know, all the ones that are resilient and strong, I guess they would be nice fit in my garden.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mess, how about you?
Well, I really wanted to come up with a snappy answer here, but I've got two kids. There's a pandemic going on and a really old house. I think that's kept me here quite busy. I spent some of the extra time, this commuting and all that, to pick up a sort of CrossFit hobby, and I've always been laughing at all the guys and girls doing that with all their special words and throwing the t-shirts and all that. But I've become quite fond of that, and that's a great activity to sort of boost the energy levels here when dealing with COVID-19. Yeah, that's it.
Great. So we can expect to see you sporting a CrossFit shirt soon.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
And Mikael, what about you?
I think, first of all, no, thank you for that whole thing about Mess and the t-shirt. I would say, all with love, Mess. I would say it's probably been about appreciation So suddenly appreciating smaller things, which we, just your normal day thing before, taking a walk, taking a run, visiting friends, seeing family, all that thing, those things suddenly became very difficult. So I think it's for me, it would definitely appreciation.
Yeah, absolutely. The things that we used to take for granted, not so much anymore. Great. Okay. Well, Emanuele, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, sure. 1 second, I'll be sharing my screen. All right, can you see? Okay, perfect. All right, so we're gonna start this presentation today talking about obviously like a security shift due to the COVID pandemic, but let's start exploring the case of duty of care and how has this concept shifted over the last few months. So actually, let's start from the fact that duty of care has been a concept that was often having a very marginal role or a secondary role, with exceptions, of course. It has become, with the COVID experience, a central part of any travel policy or clearly a travel risk management program. So I would say there are 4 aspects that we should consider when we look at the duty of care. How has it changed during COVID-19? The first one are some conceptual changes that maybe will be a bit discussed by Mats and Mikael later. For example, there is less focus on physical security, clearly as a consequence of the fact that there is not a centralized space, an office space where like activities and operations take place. There is, as a consequence of this, a higher role for emotional security, employees being more in a situation of anxiety and fear for what is happening, and clearly an obvious role for digital security, since everything we are doing is essentially done through our personal computer or company computers in our home or a very similar personal space. It still is a legal obligation, no doubt about this. Also, we are now in a situation where travel is more or less restricted everywhere or almost to essential travel. But the truth is, despite this, travel is happening. Thousands of people, millions of people are probably traveling across the world every day, cross-border type of travel. So travel is still going on. However, the situation is very different, and things that we used to give for granted before, like doing a booking on your phone, taking your passport and leaving, it's all different now. There is a lot of complexity that needs to be taken care of before the travel takes place and during potentially the travel experience. There is obviously in current duty of care a bigger role for information. All of us nowadays, we are more dependent on information, which means that there is a higher risk of misinformation contaminating our access to news. It is therefore very important, more than before potentially, that the information overabundance that is around us gets managed and controlled in a professional way. The 4th aspect, which is paramount to what Mats and Mikael will be discussing, is the possibility to communicate with the workforce. So workforce needs to be located. There needs to be a capability to communicate with them. And this brings into question how much should the company know about personal data, for example. Okay. All right. Now, some key challenges I will try to run through pretty quickly. The first is the regulatory complexity of the situation, which fuels the need for good information. Particularly, think about the essential travel I have described. If you want to have a measure to that, I think IATA in late September or early October released that around 1 billion passengers had traveled until that date, which is a very remarkable number considering we are in a pandemic. So regulatory complexity means that when travel happens, there is a need of being informed carefully about fast changing requirements that are changing essentially from country to country, and not just that, but from region to region. And also there is the aspect of re-entry. Like you go for a trip, you need to make sure, and it's not so easy. It should be given for granted that you can actually come back. There is the aspect of the legal protection that we have with privacy in Europe, which is very strong, and the role of new technology. So if we look at some countries, particularly Asia, maybe particularly China, we are looking how new technology is currently, and it has been crucial in containing the pandemic and in preventing any new wave, essentially. So this is tougher to achieve in Europe, due mostly to legal restrictions that are a major difference between, I would say, Europe, North America, and Asia. The other challenge, going back to what I was saying earlier, is that we are transitioning towards a location-free type of work. So remote work is going mainstream, essentially. So how can a company provide safety for a worker if he's remote-based? 4, obviously, a greater reliance on technology, but there is also a greater digital divide. So the access to technology is not even in the world, it's not even in a country, it's not even maybe in a household. And there is also a greatly varying level of digital literacy. So people have highly different levels of which they can use the current technology that are a necessity. Most importantly, 5th challenge, there is a lack of international standard. This reflects obviously the status of lack of global governance and regions acting in different ways, countries acting in different ways. So this is going to become a more pressing need once a vaccine gets deployed early next year, I would say. Now, I have obviously no power of looking into the future, but I can try to make an outlook on what could happen once from maybe January, maybe February, vaccine starts to be deployed in some Western countries. So I guess we will still see anti-lockdown protests continuing, and we risk potentially entering in a 3rd wave, particularly if we are too relaxed at Christmas. There will be a potentially easing of quarantine measures, and then in a 6-month time, more countries will have access to vaccine. At this point, there will be a more global divide internationally about how it is accessed. And then there will be a raising protest in favor and against essentially the vaccine. There will obviously start to see a situation where there are more protests and unrest related to the socioeconomic impact of what has happened in 2020. Going towards the year, so towards, I would say, next fall or the end of 2021, I would say vaccine deployment will be at a more advanced stage. Anti-lockdown movement will have become probably a no-vax movement, which is going to be a major headache for our societies. And then travel will have resumed, but within travel corridors or bubbles or safe area. It will not be a global travel if we don't want to have another, a 3rd wave or 4th wave in our hands. So I think this calls back what I was saying earlier about the need for a standardization. Obviously, the more we look ahead, far in the future, the harder it is to make some sort of like prediction or anticipation. But obviously, in 18 months time or 24 months, there is some maybe reassurance that things could have taken a better look than they are now. All right, now just a summary of what are the critical aspects in relation to a shifting idea of duty of care during this unprecedented pandemic. First of all, as I was saying at the beginning, duty of care is living a new moment, a new season. It has become crucial to restore travel and business confidence. This also means that the role of information has become stronger, but information needs to be filtered, needs to be analyzed. There is a higher risk of getting access to the wrong type of information. Second aspect, very important, next month, many protests against the lockdown, against the vaccination, and of course, socioeconomic type of protests across the world and across our countries particularly. Lastly, yes, we are already living a situation where technology is more widely adopted. It will be even more so, more widely adopted in the coming months and couple of years. But this means that, governments will need to build confidence and also literacy, obviously, in technology. And importantly, the use of technology, particularly with relation to privacy, will need to be regulated. And I guess, yeah, that's all, Siobhan.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Emanuele. And It looks like we already have a question for you, but I might leave that to the end where we can gather all the questions together. And now we've got Mess from Human Risks. Do you want to take over and drive the presentation?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. I just want to make sure that you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Good. So just going to move this little bar around here so I don't confuse anyone. Thank you for that, Emanuele. I'm going to take over. I'm going to be talking and focusing very much on the sort of security management perspective. I'm going to focus on these 3 areas over the next few slides and next whatever 6 to 8 minutes. Let's see how it goes. First of all, new business models. As the accelerated digitization has introduced new business models, let's take a look at that and see how that implicates, what's the implications for the security managers out there. Then an increased focus on resilience or business continuity. How can we adapt to that, and what's the key learnings from that? And how is we going to see an increased demand and a need for online collaboration? What has the whole pandemic meant in terms of that, and introduce that to the security organizations out there? I think it's clear for everybody that businesses are trying to adapt, and we're trying to change business models to secure existing revenue and gain new customers. And it has led to an accelerated digitization, and it has really fast forwarded some investments in for example, online supply chains. Personally, here we can see that IKEA has really fast forwarded a rollout of day-to-day delivery. I did a little research, and then we can see that generally e-commerce sales are up 49%, electronic sales 58%, grocery online sales 110% over the course of this pandemic. And that's according to Adobe's Digital Economy Index. I read an article here from McKinsey recently that sort of research on consumer behavior, and of course online shopping has grown dramatically, but also 75% approximately of the consumers, they intend to keep some of the new behaviors that have been introduced, like buying online and picking up at the stores, or selecting new restaurants, etc., etc. So generally we see changed consumer behavior both in B2B and B2C, but the common denominator seems to be a lot of things are moving online and digital, and that of course gives introduces a whole another set of threats and new environments, risk landscapes, basically, to the security departments. I would also expect to see an increased appetite for diversifying supply chains or vendor strategies. Maybe we could see that we've moving from a sort of just-in-time approach to maybe being more flexible, because we've seen that maybe being dependent on a few vendors that didn't have the capacity to manage to deliver during this pandemic, but also just a realization that there's a huge vulnerability in being dependent on few suppliers or a supply chain strategy, where just in time has been the key phrase or the key word earlier on. And as we see this increased online presence and change in vendor strategy and new markets, and that represents basically also a entirely new risk landscape to our companies or organizations out there. And it introduces some of the interesting aspects that I've listed up here to the security professional. I'm not saying that you should sit down and revisit security policies while crisis is rolling there and you have to manage through very uncertain times, but as a security manager, you need to make sure that your working is still aligned with the overall business strategy, because that is changing rapidly. And the new operational patterns that we see out there is that aligned with how we work internally in security? Is it, for example, aligned with the scope on assets, people, and reputation, has been a classic approach in many security policies? And what about the organizational structures when we operate in new waters? And when cyber threats might be even more relevant to organizations, are we structured in a way so we are capable of working across the organizations, so we can see the new vulnerabilities and the new potential bad actors, if you will, seen from both physical security, but also from IT and from human resources, from those different perspectives? And if we are, as physical security managers, are moving into new waters? Are we ready to maybe acknowledge that we don't have the adequate skill sets to accommodate these new or meet these new threats? What do we do there? Are we, eager to reach out and get the help we need across the organization or from outside the organization? That's some of the key things I think are super interesting and as a direct result of this pandemic. When we look at a move from risk to resilience, that's been a phrase that we heard before, but an increased focus on business continuity and everything that comes with that. As we see these new sources of fraud and crime and new threat actors, maybe new vulnerabilities, and there's a lot of unknowns that we have to navigate in as security managers, and we can't just keep on doing what we've been doing all along. We have to maybe operate and work in new ways together with new people and new stakeholders across the organization and external stakeholders as well. And we need to look at new supply chains, the increased digitization and the new partnerships, and maybe also the insider threat from a more holistic approach than just from the physical security approach that we've been used to do. And as the transformation has happened so quickly, we also need to ask ourselves if we as a security organization, are we organized in a sort of agile way that enable us to approach these new sources of threats and new ways of working in a fast way? Can we adapt to a new reality within very limited time, if you will? And when we talk about adapting security programs, we're talking new awareness programs, including training across large organizations. We're talking about new ways of assessing threats, risk assessment or security risk assessment methodologies, mitigation programs, etc., etc. Is that can we adapt that to the new landscape? And also maybe new due diligence processes if we see new partnerships, new markets, new more intangible supply chains also as we move into the online markets. So the sort of the unknown characteristics of COVID-19 and the general insecurity and the rapid change, we've seen that, well, from my perspective and also from my experience with talking to customers and the market and people I know in the industry in generally, it has led to an increased focus on resilience or business continuity, if you will, where you sort of assess the criticality of key resources that are required to ensure the continued provision of the organization's products and services, meaning basically its survival. And after that, maybe looking at the potential risks that could be the source of disrupting those resources. And that's a bit of a shift in how the classical or standard approach to managing security has been, where you start off with looking at different scenarios, how that could impact your organization, and turning that a bit around. And for our perspective and in human risk, we've also seen an increased interest in our business impact analysis module, where we see a shift from starting with the security risk assessment, but then focusing on the BIA and the business continuity to sort of start off with addressing the key vulnerabilities internally in the organization. And that also brings along cross-functional or cross-organizational work where you have to work together with IT and human resources and other departments. The final point I want to make here is an increased need for and also demand in online collaboration. Obviously, there's a lot of new limitations when we have a pandemic, less travel, you can't be on site, maybe doing the work that you used to do. So we see there's been a increased need, obviously, for updated information and intelligence, and as also the intelligence cycle has been sped up as the local situations are changing rapidly, and we see that the spread of the coronavirus is very, very different from region to region and city to city, and suddenly organizations, they can't just keep updated on the locations where their own offices are, but they need to stay updated on where they're actually their employees, where they live, their private homes, because that's where they're working from. And another aspect of that, sort of the physical presence or the lack of physical presence, is that you're not able to, as a security manager or security professional, to be on site, to give that advice and to work with the local staff. Maybe you have the local security manager or local staff on site. It could also be for reviews or auditing, etc. then you have to rely maybe on the support that you can give from the distance, and like we're doing right now on using Teams or Zoom or whatever online collaboration tool that you could use. And an increased need for doing self-assessments on a local level rather than the security department sort of facilitating that or even doing that. So we see that security departments either are, or at least that my perspective, should be looking for new tools to and new processes to sort of support that you can gather, that you can assess, and you can analyze the different data sets that you need to compensate for the lack of the physical presence, but also maybe supported by the fact that a lot of senior managers, the C-suite, if you will, they've become more used to more frequent and updated reporting, also from the security departments, as they've been involved in managing the crisis of this pandemic. Some in our network has also come to realize that existing continuity plans or assumptions simply were not correct or maybe good enough. They wasn't trained across the organization or updated, and have maybe realized that there are some shortcomings to the traditional tools, the Microsoft Office tools that you use to support business continuity and crisis management. And they're looking at a tool set that could make you capable of sharing best practices and training and sharing continuity plans across functions and across departments, basically getting an overview of who's doing what, who, when, and how. We see that security managers generally are getting more attention. They've been at sort of the central point of managing this pandemic crisis, and if they've been able to add a lot of value in running this crisis management for a larger organization, there's obviously a huge potential to play a key strategic role going forward in the continued success of the organization they work for. So I also think there's a window of opportunity for a lot of security professionals out there to continue to underline how security can sort of add value to the organizations. Well, basically, my 2 cents is that the effort here that we do as security professional is it has to be aligned with the organization's strategy, and that changes. It has to be cross-functional. If it wasn't before, it has to be now. And we have to speak a language that senior management would expect from us and that other departments are used to. And we need to sort of, in that perspective, also be super data-driven and optimize a lot of our manual processes to support ongoing operations as the environment and the organizations will keep on changing for sure. So that's my my input on how security has been impacted by this pandemic. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you very much, Mads. And now we're going to hear from Mikael from his personal experience of running a security department through this crisis.
Yes, let me just share. Is this okay? All right. So first of all, let me say, so this is my approach, right? COVID-19 came, as you probably realize, very unexpected. At least it did to me and to us. So what was kind of seemed to be key was to be, we had to kind of learn on the go. I think one of the things that we did right was that we were somehow prepared in terms of having business continuity on the agenda of senior management. Obviously, I'm probably lucky in the sense that I am part of senior management. I report to the board. So in that sense, it was known to them what business continuity is and what business continuity can when we were to activate our different response plans. Very briefly, hopefully without being boring, Scanius Arabia, just to tell a little bit about the organization that I represent. It's a 50-50 joint venture between Abu Dhabi Media Investment Group, which is a private investment company in the UAE and Abu Dhabi, and then B Sky B from the UK. We are a global 24/7, 365 news channel available on FTA, that's free to air. So that's basically on your satellite, on digital, which would be YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. I think we're even on TikTok. You can probably dance to the news now. And then on radio. Approximately 630 employees, 53 different nationalities, which normally is fantastic. During a pandemic where you have different cultures within the culture, made it a little bit complicated in the beginning. 22 bureaus, 20 countries. For global organization, we're fairly small, I believe. We do have different time zones. High risk coverage, normal business practice for us. So not only do we have the different time zones and the different cultures, we also have people going into. So if there's a hotspot, for example, we had everybody suddenly wanted to go to China and cover what was going on, and obviously also us. So how do you get a crew safely into Wuhan and how to get them out again? That was quite tricky. This is just a map to sort of visualize where we are. So we're in the US, we're in Russia, Moscow, we're in New Delhi, we're in Ethiopia, and then it's and we have 2 locations in Europe, but then it's mainly Northern Africa and the Middle East. Expectations to me in my role, well, that's strategic, tactical, operational, security risk management globally. You know this probably as well as I do. It covers physical security, travel. I sit with cyber as well, together with IT, crisis management, incident response, that sort of thing. I have the business continuity program, including the pandemic response. And then, which is probably kind of odd for a security professional, I sit with the insurance program. So that's general liability, it's directors and officers, it's property, it's health, it's vehicles, it's all this stuff. I guess because of my background at Bestseller, when I also had insurances there. During the pandemic, it actually tied up quite well together in terms of risk management, where we were looking at how do we mitigate the risk of this impacting our organization, our staff, and our assets as such. It actually turned out pretty well. We were able to use insurance in some places, security other places, and so forth. Then they expect me to report to the board. I'm happy to do so, and obviously to the rest of the senior management team, in order to support informed decision making, which is basically what they want, right? If we look at the COVID-19 expectations, more specifically, they expected me to develop our pandemic response plans and lead the crisis management team, represent senior management in the business continuity steering group we have, ensure 24/7 continuity of our editorial output. So that's basically what you see on television, making sure that was available 24/7, both on TV and digitally. That was quite a challenge. I advised the CEO personally on post-COVID risks and opportunities, and I'll return to that a little later. Ensure that our health and safety and environment department executed their plans and procedures, including having PPE available. In the UAE, we were rather lucky, I think, to be able to test staff quite early on. I think we started testing staff late April, maybe beginning of May, and we did so on a week, and then 2 weeks, and then monthly basis, and I've done so ever since. Then it was all about identifying these third-party suppliers, key suppliers, making sure that they could continue their services, which is obviously, power is sort of something that we need. We also need a satellite in order to broadcast our products and services on TV. So making sure that they were available. My approach, well, I try to keep it very practical and proactive. There's no voodoo in business continuity and security, because you got to be understood. If they don't understand you, you become irrelevant. And if you're irrelevant, you're either fired or cornered. So for me, it was all about very early on, and this was work we did in 17 and 18. So it was all about identifying what could derail our key business processes. So obviously we had to figure out what is key. We figured out quite quickly that satellite, that's pretty important. It's pretty important that we have access to data and stored data. It's pretty important that we have access to some key employees who have very specific skills. Power is important. So there's a ton of different things that we identified and could potentially derail our business. Then it was all about figuring out, so how long can they be unavailable? Some were we were actually told by the board that some of them could never be unavailable, which constitute a challenge in itself. Other might be an hour, 2 days, or so forth. We assessed what it would take and cost to return to normal within the expected time frame. And then we presented that to senior management in order for them to take a decision on setting budget aside, setting resources aside, people, time, and so forth, in order to give them what they were looking for. Again, it's not about what I want, it's about what they need, what's important for them. What we did was, and we're quite successful with, was actually asking all our manager, every department manager, what if you had no or limited access to key buildings, key staff, key suppliers, and key systems? Then what? And we gave them about 14 days where we were bouncing off in the security department, almost 24/7 in those 14 days, trying to assist and support them in making their plans. What came out was extraordinary, and that had nothing to do with me. They were spot on, whether it was our supply chain staff, in terms of moving equipment back and forth. They quickly identified new ways of doing that. It was quite significant. I'm very proud. They did a really good job. But that was very practical for them, and it was something that they could relate to. What if Mikael is not here tomorrow? No big deal. But what if Kevin is not here? Well, Kevin is kind of critical because he does X, Y, Z. So it made a lot of sense for them. Second was about planning. I guess that's what every security professional should be able to. For us, command is intent. Who does what, when, how, and when was very important, and it turned out really well. We emphasized the individual expectations, so that was down to what is expected of me specifically, and then we made sure that there was top support, so from the senior management, that it made sense for them as well. We made sure to look at whether we had the right resources available in terms of software access. That might be passwords, it might be equipment, it might be money even. Some of our bureaus when they shut down those countries, they also shut down banks, so they couldn't move at all, and suddenly they had access to no money at all because the banks were shut down. So what do you do then? So that was quite relevant for us. We looked at skills, experience, mentality, desire, and information, everything in order to succeed. And then we made sure that we established training and upskilling. We even brought in some new hires and some contractors to make sure that we had the necessary capabilities available when the different scenarios could potentially be activated, which could be a power loss, God knows what. It turned out to be a pandemic. Upon activation, again, commander's intent worked out really well and very effective, all the way from our chairman to our CEO to me and all the senior managers. They were really clear in what they expected. We had pre-drafted statements. We have an exceptional qualified marketing and comms director. She was spot on in everything she did. She was very focused on what we know and not what we think or what we have heard for someone, but made it really clear this is what we know. And we did a lot of communication. We did that up, down, sideways, which generated awareness and actually to a larger extent as we progressed in the month, to understanding also why we could or could not do something. We had daily calls within the senior management team and the crisis management team and in the different departments where we made sure that there was some kind of control of what do you do the first 15 minutes upon activation. So upon receiving that call from me saying you need to do X, Y, Z, what do? You know, and that needed to be very, very specific. Some laminated, you know, their response plans so that this is mine, this is what I had to do. They had it in their bag, they had it on their phone, they had it maybe on their desk, put it on the wall, just to make sure that they were ready when told to do something. We acted short term, but was thinking long term. What if this continues? You know, God knows, you know, it's still there. So we were thinking, what do we do in terms of staff fatigue? We had at one point 64, 62 people working in two-man teams. So they were working 12 hours on, 12 hours off for a couple of months. How do you make sure that they are still on the ball, that they're rested, that they're aware and ready? You know, some of them have to go on TV, and you just can't look sleepy on TV. That's bad TV, man. And it was all about being practical and clear in what we said, did, and recommended. And that includes me. Did I do that all the time? Probably not, but it was our clear intention to be very clear. If you look at what we did, and again, some of you might have done differently, and you had more success than the decisions we took. We started out on 28th of January, you know, had a lot of we do a lot of intelligence analysis, you know, or it's probably just analysis of information, to be honest, which then might turn up into intelligence, which we might then escalate to senior managers. By 28th of January, we had seen that this whole COVID thing was really gaining traction in China. And we notified the CMT of the development. On 16th of February, we drafted a pandemic-specific response plan. We did not have that. So we had to draft one. It turned out pretty successfully and was actually later apparently translated into Arabic and shared with the National Emergency Council in Abu Dhabi for the Abu Dhabi entities to use. So that's, I guess that it was useful in some way. 29th January, we activated the CMT plus all the managers and then asked them to take into account the no access, the no or limited access to buildings, key staff, key suppliers, and key systems. 14 days approximately later, they were we had the CMT approval for all those response plans. They turned out really well, and they all came into action. On April 1st, sorry, we created the mobile lockdown plan for business critical staff. So that's the 162, 164. All the way down to identifying, we had deals with 2 hotels. We had occupied, I think it was 4 different floors, making sure we had shuttle buses with guards on board, making sure that we had food in those different floors at those hospitals, making sure there was access to laundry services, to hairstylists, to, you know, we made plans for all of this. And I have a really skilled colleague of mine who was, you know, really good at this stuff, and so he made all that work. 15th April, we activated only having 30% of staff in office, and we then started the whole testing of in-office staff, and we did that every 14 days. We had sanitizing of the entire office once a week. We had obviously PPE, as all of you also had. We had a sanitizing bridge, which we actually canceled maybe 2 months after. Honestly, it was like being spit at before you enter work, which, you know, it didn't have, I couldn't find any documented effect on success, and neither could the people I talked to. So we canceled that. Again, 15th April, we started having daily management updates and meetings. We had that throughout. August 1st, we were back 50%, then 75%. I think it's on the 16th of August or something like that. And then by end of August, we had 100% of staff in office, and we have continued to do so ever since. Today, we are still testing staff. So we have made free tests available for all staff, so they can get this movement restrictions between for the different Emirates. So that's kind of specific to the UAE at the moment. So they are free of charge for staff. So if you live in Dubai and need to go to Abu Dhabi to work, you can get those tests free. its PCR test. We also make sure that there's PPE available, obviously, to everyone, and we make sure that our response plans are continually tested. So that's something we do every week, and every day at our morning briefing, I ask staff who are in that morning briefing, so what do you do if XYZ happens? What do you do? And then what do you do? In order to, and they ask me the same, you know, I'm accountable too. So it's about helping each other be accountable, be ready. If we look at the information, you know, that suddenly became very important. Information is always important, but now it became particularly important because nobody knew what on earth was going on. In the beginning, we were looking at WHO, we were looking at Johns Hopkins University. We soon saw that, you know, that information from those two entities didn't match up. Apparently, they didn't agree on the verification of information. We then looked more to our local staff and the contacts they have in the different government entities. We included some of the fixers we have. That's a normal practice for news organizations to have different fixers, short-term contractors, I guess. And then use their information, took it in, looked at it. We had 3 independent sources indicating something that might be, you know, saying the same thing, and then we moved on from there in terms of reporting. Twitter. In the beginning, we had access to what's called Data Minar, which is I guess a Twitter product. We canceled that. Twitter exploded with fake news. We were part of a lot of WhatsApp groups. There's one particularly called Crisis Management Peers. If you're not part of that group, man, you should apply for it. It was really helpful. We shared a lot of very, very practical, useful information in that group. Global networks, ASIS. I'm a CBCI certified business continuity guy. So I use that network too, and then security networks, whether that would be on LinkedIn or Facebook for that matter. International SOS, we had access to them at the beginning, and their doctors, and then later we had Riskline and Human Risk, which we have had throughout the entire period. I think validation was kind of, and being critical of what you read and what you hear and what people tell you, it's you know, important before, but now perhaps even more important. So what was kind of interesting was actually in June, after a board meeting, I was asked by our CEO and the board to start a research study of how the post-COVID business environment would look like globally. And so I spent 3 months doing a ton of research, everything from, you know, just collecting data, you know, whether it was podcasts or webinars or articles or whatever it was. I took it all in, analyzed it all, and then in August I presented my findings, and it's actually now ended up with me being asked to produce a new business model for either Sky transforming into something or actually becoming a whole new entity, which has nothing to do with security. But I guess that's, you know, speaking a language they understand, that made that relevant for them. Some of the findings from that study is, well, you know, organizations are restructuring. It's happening already. You know, it's been going on for a couple of months now. All the CEOs and the boards, they are evaluating staff numbers and opportunities, whether to relocate staff entirely, maybe to outsource stuff using more suppliers, freelancers, contractors, and then the whole work from home, work from anywhere scenario. Many organizations are looking at introducing lean or some form of lean, and then strengthening high performance teams. Continued digital transformation. If you're not already digital, you're probably lacking behind. Digital transformation is a buzzword, digitalization at the moment, but that's definitely something that we as security professionals need to be on board of. We need to understand what does that potentially mean for what we do. You know, many companies were looking at digitalization because they believed it would strengthen their digital reach, their relevance, their workflow efficiency, and even their digital performance via consumer knowledge. If they were already, you know, advertising on Facebook or YouTube or Instagram or Twitter or whatever it was, getting access to that consumer data, analyzing it for then increased revenue. Technologically, improvements, introducing cross-functional collaboration tools like Slack is already happening. for efficiency and speed. Efficiency and speed is something that we need to be aware of as security professionals, because it is something that will be asked from us as well. Speed to market, from idea to it hits the consumer, needs to be as short as possible. That lead time needs to be as short as possible. So that's something that might affect whatever we are doing, whether that's the supply chain, or it's in terms of increased cyber risks, or warehouse storage, or whatever it is. Or perhaps just coming down to staff making mistakes because they need to speed up their processes. Introducing cloud-based data platforms, that's another thing that's happening. So it's basically companies are moving their infrastructure and servers and storage to the cloud. It's about exploring automation across business workflows, processes, and end user requirements. Again, something that we need to be aware of. How can we automatically push information to clients when it is relevant for them? That's something that we need to be aware of too. And how can we support our companies in what they are trying to do? I'll get back to that also. 4, rethinking revenue streams. So it's all about making money, and a lot of companies have been without, they definitely not hit their budget in 2020. So it's about strengthening sales efficiency, consumer knowledge, collaboration, digital sales, exploring new revenue options, perhaps even new markets, which again, something that will then affect us. What kind of markets are they? When will we be there? How will we be there? Which kind of presence will we have? And so forth. We got to stay on the beat, and we got to know what the senior management team are thinking. 5, staff training, upskilling, and policies. It's about identifying staff for training and upskilling those who can and are willing to. So that, there's 2 very different things. One is being able to learn or being told to learn. It's all about being able to, and that's something that we got to look at as well as security professionals. Remote management, obviously, that's high and relevant on the agenda. And performance management, we need to make sure that people perform, whether they work from anywhere or they sit at a regional hub. Strengthening staff policies and workflows, something that Mads also mentioned, which probably a good idea to look at your policies and procedures and workflows, if not every quarter, perhaps even more often. Cost efficiency modeling, something I discussed a lot with our CFO, because it's about cost flexibility, it's about savings on staff, travel, office space, staff benefits, even it's about using freelancer contractors with all the different risks that comes with doing either saving on travel, staff benefits, or the whole bringing in freelancers. For us, that's about vetting. It's about, do we have a contract with them? Do they know what they're expected? Have they signed our code of ethics? Have they signed our code of conduct? All this stuff. Do we have their local ID? Do we have their IKD number so that we can identify them if they do something they're not allowed to, if they go missing or get injured? What's our duty of care towards them? And make sure that you're aligned with your legal department and HR on that. Third-party providers or suppliers, something that was definitely high on the agenda for us, because that would generate that cost flexibility, where you might, instead of having Mikael full-time paying him God knows what he's getting paid, but then it would be better to bring in Mikael, whenever he is needed, instead of having him full-time, potentially. And then again, lean and speed to market, very, very important. So these are all elements I found that, and there are more, this is just summary, but that boards and senior management have been looking at and are looking at moving forward, and we gotta know. We gotta stay up there. We gotta know, we gotta speak their language. We simply we need to know what's in their vision, mission, their strategy, in order for us to be relevant and make sure that we can help them make it happen and realize it. Security management post-COVID, what does it look like? Definitely for me, it's about business understanding. It's about understanding your company and its products and services. How do we make money? What is it that your company is trying to achieve, and where? It's like linking what you do to what they're trying to achieve in order to, it might be, enable quicker sales or safer sales or more sustainable growth for the company, or perhaps even saving money. Business continuity, Mads mentioned it. you got to keep it practical, man. It's not don't make it to some kind of black voodoo art. It can't be, because then it becomes again irrelevant. You got to make it practical, but you got to look at maximum tolerable downtime. You got to look at recovery time objectives, stuff like that. Find someone who knows a lot about business continuity, and then either tap their brain, hire them in, full-time, part-time, contracting, whatever. You got to know, man. And you gotta read your books, you gotta do your podcast and all that stuff in order to make sure that you're on the ball. Global talent access and leadership, very important. Make sure that you're on the ball, because companies will be looking for talent globally. And training and testing, it's about us also stepping up our game. We got to make sure that we have the right knowledge and that we have people around us with the right knowledge. Lastly, some future challenges, I think, fake news being one of them. And I say that coming from the media, especially on social media, man, we got to be critical about what we read. Cyber threats definitely here to stay. It's something that we have to be very aware of going forward. If we don't look at cyber already, it's something that we definitely need to start looking at. Third-party providers, suppliers, because they are key to our business, and it will generate that cost flexibility. We depend on them. And therefore, it's a pretty good idea to identify them and figure out whether they have business continuity plans in place, whether they are testing them, perhaps put them in your service level agreements with them, something that you can speak to legal about. I think that's it for me. Maybe a last word is just, no or limited access to key buildings, staff, suppliers, and systems. It's a really practical advice, if I can give you such. Because it's something that people can relate to.
Great. Thank you very much for your insights on what it was actually like managing a crisis such as this, and also on the research that you did for what this could look like in the future and what the future business environment looks like. And that actually, we've only got a couple minutes left, but I've got a question for all three of you on how has the pandemic changed your view on how security should be organized? Because there's so many different branches of security. You've got travel security, you've got physical security, cyber. You also mentioned the role of insurance as well, Mikael. So I'm curious to see what your perspective is in the last couple of minutes on, has the pandemic experience changed your view on should all of these different aspects be brought together, or should they even be separate?
So I'm in favor of bringing them all together, just because from a risk management perspective, that makes sense. It's all about managing risk, and you could do that by accepting the risk, or you can share it with an insurance, or you can, whatever. You can do a lot of stuff with that. And I think making sure that you have all that span of control in what you do, I think that makes sense. But I honestly think it's not for me to say how security should look like. I think that's for the CEO, it's for the senior management, for the board, because it's very different. Different companies, different industries, different cultures, different expectations. Some have a really high risk tolerance, some don't. Some have regulations, compliance, regulations that they have to apply to. So I think my advice would be, you got to speak to your senior managers. You got to speak to your board. You got to understand what are they expecting, and then obviously make sure that you give them some kind of a practical solution in order to make that happen.
Great. Mess and Emanuele, do you have any thoughts on this issue as well?
Yeah, I definitely do, and I think a super relevant point that Mikael is making. It is contextual and context specific. It depends on the context, but what I've come to realize is that I also try to make the point. It's going to be more cross-functional than ever. So you have to work across your organization, and you have to know the entire width of your organization, from cyber to the insider threat or insurance programs or financial risks that you might approach. I think what is key for a lot of the staff functions that we have out there in larger organizations is that you have to be able to train and upskill, if you will, the organization, so you don't become a specialist department that only knows about security, but you have to facilitate that the rest of the organization they know a little bit about security and know how to drive those processes, so you facilitate, so they don't come dependent on you because you're the security manager or director or whatever on your department, but you sort of ensure that the knowledge is out in the organization so they can take care of themselves. And we look at the organization sort of, instead of silos, then looking at sideways from the customer's perspective. That's definitely my 2 cents here.
Great, thank you. And Emanuele, I know particularly from an information perspective, like the information that Riskline provides, do you have a perspective on this topic as well?
Well, we have obviously seen a huge increase in interest in travel risk information, which, as mentioned before, should be, provided systematically and in a way that is structured and analyzed. I think this goes back maybe on the opposite side of like what Mikael was referring to, meaning it's really the the traveler who is at stake. If the traveler does not feel safe, if he doesn't know, he or she, what's going on, if whoever is organizing his travel does not know this, he will not want to travel, and then travel will never resume. And if travel doesn't resume, operations will continue to be affected in a way. So obviously this is our perspective at Riskline, but like the solution to part of this, as like we transit out of the pandemic and security approach changes as a consequence of the pandemic, information, how it is provided, how it is accessed, how it is analyzed, is obviously for us has a primary role when we think particularly about travel.
Great, thank you very much. Well, we are 1 minute over time, so unfortunately we'll have to wrap it up. But if you have any questions or anything, you can get in contact with one of our presenters. And with that, we'll say goodbye, and we hope you have a great rest of December, and hopefully this is the last of 2020 and we can all have a much better 2021. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming today. And thank you to our presenters.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for participating. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.